Hi, good evening, everyone. How you doing? I'm Lee Love, and I'm your host tonight for Photo Mentor TV, as we do every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Glad you could join me, and if you're watching on the replay, thanks also for tuning in tonight, and or whenever you're watching, day, morning, evening, night, whatever it may be. Anyway, so thanks for coming for joining me. I hopefully you'll find this enjoyable. The purpose of this show is to help encourage, educate, and mentor new photographers primarily. I found there's a real need for people that get bad information, wrong information. What I call stuff they read, but not stuff they actually know how to practice. And so that's the purpose of this show, is to help give you the straight scoop, at least from my perspective of 20 plus years as a commercial photographer. So anyway, I'm glad you're here. Let's see here. You could be watching this. By the way, we have two places you can watch and leave comments. One is if you're on Facebook, you can go to facebook.photomentor.tv. Or if you can go to youtube.photomentor.tv, and it'll take you to the YouTube page. And either one of those places, if you leave a question for me, which I hope you do, and plenty of comments, it'll show up on my screen. I can bring it up and we can discuss some of the topics that you may have. Let's see here. What else? It's going to be a weird one tonight, as usual. I'll give you a little backstory here, but not a whole lot because I know you guys don't care. Let's see here. Oh, if you do appreciate what we're doing here tonight, I would greatly appreciate if you would share this page, or subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share the videos with other new photographers that you know that are struggling or trying to get and grow as a photographer, which is the purpose of this show, as I mentioned. So that'd be great. I would really appreciate if you share that information with other people you think might be interested. Let's see here. A couple of things before we get going that you should know about. One thing is the first Friday of the month, we do something called Photo Mentor, our photo reviews, and these reviews are anonymous. So the idea is I don't want you to feel intimidated, or if you're a new photographer, feel free to join us anyway. It doesn't matter. We're not going to call you out or embarrass you or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is to help improve your photography, not demean or in any way chastise you. Again, any camera, any experience. This is not limited to a DSLR, mirrorless, even smartphone photography. And I think tonight you'll see why I say that. And then again, the images are reviewed from an artistic standpoint. They're not reviewed from a whether I like them or not, or whether I like the subject. This is not a Facebook, thumbs up, thumbs down, like kind of thing. I look at them on the area of composition, which of course is very, very important. The technical merit, of course, that's important as well. And then whether there's a story behind your image or not. And so if you're interested in submitting any photos, I'd love to have you go to review.photomentor.tv. That'll redirect you to a page where you can upload your images. I think I ask a couple of questions, just like your name and your email, so I can get back in touch with you if I have any follow-up questions. And then also how long you've been shooting, because that helps. I mean, if you've been shooting for 10 years, and that has a bearing on how I might review your work. But if you just been, got a brand new camera and you only been shooting for 6 months, that also has a. So that's the first Friday of the month. I encourage you to submit those photos as early as possible, like now, so that we get them set up and you can get you in the queue there. The other thing is, if you're a social mediaite, and you want to join us and follow us on some of the social sites, I encourage you to do that. I will definitely follow you back if you want to follow me here on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, and it's Photo Mentor TV is the place to do that. And finally, but not least, is that we also have a small band of misfits. I like to think of us that way, at least, At least I'm the head misfit. I don't know about everybody else. They're probably pretty sane. I'm the one that probably doesn't belong in the group. Um, I kind of follow the model of Groucho Marx, if old comedian that said I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me, or wouldn't want to be wouldn't want to join a club that had me as a member, or something like that. So anyway, but if you want to go, if you want to check it out and join us over there, it's a little bit different. We go into a lot more detail on some of this stuff. You're not going to be demeaned. It's not a typical kind of Facebook group. But anyway, if you're in, I'm only interested, if you're interested in joining, please only do so if you're interested in helping people. Not interested in having people come over there that are just know-it-alls and want to bully people. That's the one rule we have. The one rule we have is you have to be there to help people. That's pretty much it. So photomentor.tv/join. Go there, fill out some information. Then when you go, you'll be redirected back to the group page and just click invite or join at the top there, a little blue button, and that will notify me that you'd like to be considered for the group. So anyway, I hope you do that. I hope you do one of those things, and I hope you follow what we're doing here. I think you'll find it very enjoyable and useful more than anything else. Okay. Let's see. So tonight I'm gonna, it's not done on purpose, I promise you, but I'm probably gonna ruffle some feathers, and that's not my intent. My intent is really to get you to think and to evaluate how you shoot and why you shoot, really more importantly. And I'll try and go into this in more detail, but as you probably saw already, the topic of of tonight is is learning to shoot on manual mode hurting or helping new photographers. I mean, you can reword this any way you want. A lot of people have misrepresented what I'm saying here, so let me be very, very clear. All right, let me explain what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying, first of all, don't shoot on manual. I'm not saying that you don't need to learn the skills to shoot on manual. You need to understand the craft. You need to understand the exposure triangle, as it's called. You need to understand the relationship between aperture and shutter and ISO. That all is important. My point, and what I'm trying to say tonight, don't misinterpret, don't mix up my words. What I'm trying to tell you tonight is I believe, and I think I'm going to prove it to you, using my own methods, that the problem, it's not that it's a problem shooting on manual. It's shooting on manual as the first thing a new photographer learns. That's where I think the mistake is. And just bear with me. I'll go into some detail on this, and you guys can agree or disagree. I'm anxious really to hear your thoughts. If you disagree or if you agree, leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But at the end of it, I'd also like to know if you think that my points are valid or not. So that'd be interesting to hear. Okay. Let's see what else we got. I think that's pretty much it for that part of it. So the idea is that as a new photographer, you're overwhelmed. I mean, I have taught hundreds of photographers photography, lighting, Photoshop, Lightroom, all those things. And in my experience, what I've discovered is that a lot of what I consider the old school method of teaching photography is you have to start with the exposure triangle. You have to, use that model. I should have loaded one up here somewhere, but you're supposed to teach people the ratio or the relationship between exposure, aperture, and ISO. And those are important, believe me. But the problem is, as I see it, when you start by shooting on manual, you basically take this $1,000 camera, whatever you spend on it, and you turn it into a 1960s film camera. It's totally manual. In fact, you might as well turn off autofocus, which most people don't do, but why not? I mean, if you're going to be teaching from the very basic, then the camera should have no autofocus, no auto exposure, no, everything should be manual. In fact, maybe you should use an external light meter. But nobody does that, do they? In fact, here's my analogy. When you learn to drive a car, do you think it's a valid point that you should first learn how a combustion engine works before you're able to get the rules of the road and learn to drive? Do you think that you should be required, that the law should require you to start out on a stick? You should be able to, a manual transmission before you ever learn to drive. Well, I mean, wouldn't that make sense? If you're going to write, the analogy I think holds very true, is that if you're going to be teaching people manual photography mode, then because that's the basis of everything that the camera works on, then wouldn't it make sense to learn to drive a manual transmission before you learn to drive an automatic transmission in case there's a problem or the car gets stuck in some mode that you can't work in? No, it doesn't make sense. People don't go that way. You spend $1,000 or more on a camera and lenses and everything else, and that camera has more technology than we've ever seen in cameras. You can shoot at these amazing ISOs. The meterings are fantastic. You have thousands of focus points on some of these cameras. So it makes sense when you're starting out, I'm going to repeat that, to use the technology the cameras gives you. Now, why is that important? And here's why I think it's important. It's important because learning to see and learning to understand what makes a great photo is way more important than what mode you're shooting on. It doesn't matter. I'll show you some photos. Okay, here's an example. Let me bring one up. Where are they? Okay, here we go. So if I show you a photo, you tell me if you think this was shot on, let's see here. Is this shot on manual mode, automatic, aperture priority, shutter priority, or whatever? You tell me. I mean, I can't tell. If you can tell, you're a better photographer than I am. But I can't tell what mode it was shot on. In fact, I bet you can't even tell me what camera it was shot on. Can you? Most people can't. So, depending on what you're trying to do, it may not matter what camera you're shooting on, okay? Or it may not matter what mode you're shooting on. Okay, here's another one. What mode is this one shot on? Manual, maybe. Aperture priority, not sure. Okay, so I don't know what mode this camera was using when it did. And here's one more. What about this one? What mode was it on when they shot on it? Okay, I'm not sure on this one either, but it's a great looking image. It's composed properly. It's got nice lines. It draws you into the subject matter, which is my point. This is what I'm trying to get across, is that what makes a great image has nothing to do with the mode that your camera shoots on or that you shot it on. It can be completely automatic and nobody would ever know the difference if it's properly exposed. If it's not properly exposed, then there's adjustments that need to be made. But what I'm trying to get at is it's more important to learn how to shoot a good photo, how to create a compelling image, how to put emotion in your image way before it gets into shooting, learning the exposure triangle. So here's the system that I've developed in working with hundreds of photographers. Again, I think this is what I call the step process. The first thing, so here, let me explain these to you. The first step is learning to see. Okay, I believe learning to see is the most important aspect of photography. I don't care what camera you use. I don't care if you use a $50,000 Hasselblad or Leica. I don't care if you use an iPhone. If you don't know how to see an image, if you don't know how to recognize an image, if you don't know how to look at the light and understand the light, It doesn't matter. So learning to see is what makes a great photo. When someone hires Annie Leibovitz or any well-known photographer, they don't hire them because they know the exposure triangle. In fact, I know many photographers, a lot of large, big name photographers. Of course, they know this, but they don't, that's not why they're hired. And in fact, they have an assistant or multiple assistants. I love lighting, for example. I'm passionate about it, almost obsessed with lighting. And I can light. If you look at any of my work, you'll see that I know how to light. I think people that know me know that. But on a large project, like an ad campaign, I hire an assistant. And the assistant I hire knows lighting. And when I tell him what I want, he sets the lighting up. I don't have to set it up. Okay? And I've seen many, if you watch any videos on Annie Leibovitz, or again, our assistant sets up the camera, sets it up, hands it to her. She does the shoot, hands him back the camera. He downloads them, he post-processes them, he or she, whatever. The point is, I'm not saying you don't need to know these things, but what I'm trying to tell you is that's not why you get hired. That's not what makes a great photographer. You get hired because you know how to see, because you're creative, because you're passionate, and you can deliver a compelling image. That's why people hire you. So I would rather have somebody, a student that is more of an artist than someone that is more of a technician. So let's go back to this again here. So the first thing is learning to see. All right, as I mentioned before, okay, the learning to see is much more important than learning exposure or processing or any of that. Now, when you're starting out and I'm not talking about, not everybody's a commercial photographer, not everybody's doing advertising, not everybody has assistants. I get that. Don't get me wrong about what I'm trying to say here. But even if you're shooting on an iPhone for yourself, your images will be much better if you work on learning this process first instead of learning to worry about the exposure triangle or shooting on manual. I see so many people that will post an image on Facebook and they'll say, hey, can I fix this image using editing software? And typically the image is way underexposed or way overexposed. 99% of the time, I can tell you those pictures were shot on manual, because any reasonable modern camera wouldn't allow you to shoot like that unless the settings are all messed up. But and I'm not talking even on auto, I'm talking about aperture priority, program mode, shutter priority, any of those modes, the camera is going to make some of those decisions for you and will give you a reasonably exposed image. So when they post an image that's totally blown out, I know someone has told them that they need to be shooting on manual. If you're going to be, you got to shoot manual. If you're not, only professional photographers shoot on manual, which is BS, by the way. Okay, that makes no sense. I know plenty of photographers, including myself, that don't shoot on manual. I mean, I shoot on manual when it's called for, but I shoot on whatever mode makes sense to get the image I need. It could be manual, could be aperture priority, could be shutter priority. Depends on what I'm trying to do. So anyway, the second thing that's important is learning to tell a story. If your images are not compelling, it's because you're probably not telling a story. Okay? How many times have we seen a picture of a flower or a sunset or something like that? Technically, it's shot correctly. Technically, it's properly exposed. Technically, it's a great image. But so what? It's boring. People don't go, oh, wow, that just makes me breeze tears to my eyes. No, because there's no story behind it. I'm not saying there's not a place for doing that kind of work. But what I'm trying to tell you is the work that people admire the most, the work that people want to hire you to do if you're trying to do this as a living, or that what people respond to the most are images that you see something unique, you're able to deliver that uniqueness, and you're able to tell a story behind it. Those are the images that people react to. Those are the images that people want to hire you to shoot. It's not about what camera you're using. It's not about whether you know the exposure triangle. I told somebody the other day we were having this discussion about this. I don't know if they're watching or not, and they didn't agree with me, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with me. They kept trying to tell me that if you don't know how to solve a problem and you only know how to learn to shoot on auto, then you're going to be in trouble. And I would agree with that, frankly. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you start on auto, then you can migrate and you start learning composition, then your images will become much, much better faster. And that's really the point here of all of this. When teaching someone, if I start by teaching them the exposure part, okay, which I call this right here, okay, which I call the exposed part. If you start there, then there's nothing. Then you start producing really technically boring pictures. Again, perfectly exposed sunset. So what? Nobody cares. How many hundreds of thousands of those are posted on the internet every day? They're boring. And my point is here, I'd rather use an iPhone and learn to see and focus on learning to see. Learn composition, learn lighting, learn how to tell a story way before learning to worry about learning exposure triangle. So it's there. It's, as you can see, it's part of the process, okay? But it's not the only process, and it's not the one that you should focus on first. That's what I'm trying to say. So now, let me go back here. I'm going to kind of give you a little treat here. I mentioned something to you, and what I didn't tell you was this is an iPhone photo. Not mine, but it's an iPhone photo. This is an iPhone photo. And this is an iPhone photo. So it doesn't matter what camera you use to create an image. What matters is your eye, learning to see, learning to tell a story. That trumps everything else when you're starting out. Now, as you get more sophisticated, you start learning, you'll find what'll happen is you'll say, I want to create this kind of image. And then you do need to learn more of those kind of skills. But it's not necessarily the skill that you need to start with. So anyway, let me see here. Got a couple other things I wanted to tell you about as we go into this before we get into the question and answer period. Let me see here. Where did I put them? Of course, I can't find them now. Okay. So anyway, again, manual mode is great, but it's not necessary to start off on that. Start off by learning to see and look at composition and those kinds of things, and framing and lighting first. Learn to show an image or a subject in a way it's never been seen before. Let me give you a quick example. It doesn't matter what camera you're shooting in. If you're photographing a person, okay, do you realize that the angle, the eye line angle you're shooting at has a huge difference in what that image says about the person and about your photo? If you're shooting up on and down on somebody, it tends to make them look smaller. Not physically, but it makes them look emotionally smaller in a way. If you shoot up on somebody, just a little bit below the eye line, that makes them look stronger. When I photograph a lot of athletes, and I could show you images I typically shoot at a lower angle because I want them to look like heroes. All right? What does that have to do with what mode you're shooting on? Nothing. Doesn't matter. You could do that on auto and you'd still get the same results. Okay? So that is what I'm talking about. Those are the skills you need to learn first, not the exposure triangle. It's important. As I said before, I'll keep saying this, but not the first thing you need to learn. Again, why turn your $1,000 whatever camera into a 1960s film camera and turn all this stuff off? Learn to use the tools that are there. Here's another example of what I'm talking about. Do you realize that when you shoot on aperture priority, that aperture priority also requires that you know the exposure triangle. It's doing part of the work for you. The way aperture priority works, is it's saying, I'm going to pick the aperture manually, and you're going to let the camera pick the shutter speed. And if you have the camera on auto ISO, it'll do that well, or it doesn't have to. It can do it on you can let it set it manually. So you're setting one of three choices, one of three choices. You're setting the aperture. Now, the camera's going to pick the shutter speed. What do you do if the shutter speed is too slow? You have to go in and raise the ISO or change the aperture to a larger aperture. That's the exposure triangle. But yet you're letting the camera do some of that work for you. So that's what I'm talking about. If you shoot on manual, you have to do all three of those. If one of them's not right, you're changing all three of them. So I'm saying let the camera do some of the work. If I'm shooting something and I want to show motion, let's say I'm photographing a car for an ad or something, and I want to show that car like it's going 1,000 miles an hour down the road, I would shoot on shutter priority, and I would pan with the vehicle, and the background's going to be blurred and the vehicle's going to be stopped. Okay? If I don't have enough light to do that, and once I've got that locked in, guess what? I change the aperture, or it changes the aperture. So because the camera's picking the aperture, I have to change the ISO so the aperture goes up and down. That's the exposure triangle. But you're not shooting on manual. You're not having to let the camera do some of the work for you, and that way you'll learn faster. And that's really the point of all of this, is that I want my students to become confident. I want them to become successful, and I want them to have some success right up front. I want them to get excited about photography. But if they get overwhelmed by the technical stuff and what I call the techno babble, and they have to worry about all that stuff to start with, you're going to get discouraged. I mean, who wouldn't? All of us do that with any kind of thing we're learning about. Doesn't matter, it was the old days of programming your VCR, which the joke is they're all blinking 12 o'clock because nobody knew how to set them, right? Or it could be a camera, setting an exposure on a camera. If it becomes too complicated and you're just starting out, it's very easy to get, discouraged. I don't want you to get discouraged. I want you to have success right up front. And that's why I believe that this model I'm talking about makes a whole lot of sense, and why I've shown it to be proven over and over again that this really works. Learn to see, learn to tell a story, then learn more about how to expose a proper image, and then learn the post-processing part. Okay? All right, so the other thing is, if I haven't said this before, let me repeat it. A perfectly exposed image is the exact same image on manual as it is on aperture priority, as it is on shutter priority, as it is on program, or auto. In other words, if the light meter, however you want to use it, a handheld one in the camera, whatever you figure out, whatever tool you're using, if the light meter says this is the exposure at, let's say, f8, 1/25th of a second, and thanks, Greg, and 1/25th of a second at ISO 100, it doesn't matter. I could take that on manual and shoot it, and it's going to look exactly the same picture. I can put it on aperture priority, dial those in. It's going to be exactly the same photo. So, anyway, that's so here I gotta. All right, so my buddy Greg, I gotta show you guys this. This is my buddy Greg Gibson. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it. That means a lot that you'd say that. He knows I'm passionate about this. Greg is a Pulitzer winner. He was a photojournalist. He's very, very talented, and so to have him reinforce this tells me that he's been there too and that he understands it. And he also understands that it's not that you do have to understand exposure. You do have to understand the craft. And I'm not saying you don't. In fact, I'm the opposite. I'm one of these people that harps on people that not learning the craft. Nothing worse. I've talked to people say, hey, what lens should I get? I'm saying, well, what kind of stuff are you shooting and what kind of aperture are you looking for? And they'll go, what's an aperture? And I just rub my head and go, oh my gosh. You don't even know what an aperture is and you're trying to buy this new lens? That's what I mean. You have to know that stuff. But my point is, from an artistic standpoint, you're better off learning the artistic aspect first, to learn to see, learn to tell a story first, and then learn the other. Because I believe, in my experience, I can teach anybody the technical stuff. It's the easiest thing to learn. Why? It doesn't change. It's the same since the beginning of photography. There's only 3 things you can change, 4 if you count focus. You can only change aperture, you can only change shutter speed, you can only change ISO. That's it. There's only those 3 things. Or the light. I mean, you could get, granular, and so you could change the amount of light and that kind of stuff. But the point is, those are the only 3 things you can change. So that's easy to teach somebody. I've taught 10-year-old kids, and I've taught 80-year-old grandmothers. So that's not the problem. What is hard, and what is the most difficult thing to do, is to teach you how to see. Teach you how to take a great image. What makes a great image? Learning that is much, much more difficult. I've had some friends of mine who were graphic designers. I don't know if Gabe's on here. Thank you. Did I say that, Sue Ann? Pulitzer surprise? I apologize. That's not what I meant to say. Pulitzer Prize winner. Okay. Was awarded that. I've taught people that are graphic designers that don't know anything about photography. And it's frustrating because they're so much better than I am right off the bat. They understand color theory. They understand composition. They understand white space. They understand rule of thirds. All those things to them, they've already learned. So it's just teaching them the mechanics. And the mechanics, as I said, are the easiest part. So anyway, I'm going to move off of this. I think I've gone this long enough, but I wanted to kind of talk about this briefly and just kind of get you guys thinking that if you want to become a better photographer more quickly, follow what I'm trying to tell you here, and it will happen. I promise you. I've seen it happen many, many times. Learn to see first, and I'm going to go into more detail on this later on in other episodes and other things. I'm working on some other stuff I'm going to show you. But learn to tell a story, then learn to expose the image properly manually or letting the camera do it. Then learn about post-processing. And I think you'll find that you'll become a much better, I know you will. You'll become a better photographer more quickly. So anyway, all right. I think I have, thank you, Mario. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Mario is another great photographer who I admire. He's been around a while. He does a lot of different kinds of photography. And he's somebody and what I love about Mario is, by the way, I've seen him grow very quickly. He's not afraid to take on a new challenge. And so whether it's a wedding or real estate or whatever he's shooting, he dives right in with both feet and both eyes and really grows. That's how he learns. And that's how I learn. I learn more from my mistakes than I do my successes. And I think he would probably agree with that. So anyway, all right. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty here. If you have any comments about that and you disagree, please leave them in the comments section. I really would like to hear that. Because again, you don't have to agree with me. If you don't believe me, fine. That's cool. I don't care really. I've proven this to myself many times and I know it's true. But if you have a different perspective, that's terrific. I applaud. Okay. All right. Let's move on here and to some of the other stuff we're going to be talking about tonight. And the first thing is we got a question from Carmen. And Carmen, if you says that I want to get back into photography and offered to take pictures at my daughter's daycare. It wouldn't be free of a charge, so she'd do it with a small fee. But I want to get back into the swing of things. Do I need to set up any kind of LLC setup first? So, Carmen, first of all, I'm glad to hear that you're getting back into photography. It's a great, great, great hobby and a profession, really. It's tough. It's not easy because everybody that has a camera thinks they're a photographer, a professional photographer. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. So don't be discouraged by that. Now, the other thing I'll tell you is I am not a CPA, which you probably figured that out by now. I can barely speak, as Sue Ann pointed out so brilliantly, which is no surprise. And I'm not an attorney, but I'll give you some my feedback on my experience, and you can take it for what it's worth. That's my disclaimer. The first thing is, yes, you do want to charge something. And what I would do is, if you're going to continue with this, maybe on this first one it's not necessary, but if you find that you're going to stick with it and you're going to start doing more of this kind of work, then I would definitely set up a separate bank account. And it can be what's called a DBA, or it could just be under your name, but that keeps your funds separate. And what you can do is, if you buy equipment, you can take money out of that account, and it's easier to track, so that if you do your own taxes or you have somebody else do them, it's much, much easier to be able to do that. Hey, Carl, how are you? Carl, you're not the Carl. This is not Carl Brown that I used to work with, is it? Is that the same Carl Brown? I don't know. I know another Carl Brown I worked with many, many decades ago. He left a comment. I'll get to that in a minute. So you want to set up a separate bank account so you can track your expenses. You want to be able to expense the things that you're purchasing, because those are deductions and they're cost of doing business. So if you don't have, and again, check with your CPA, but the way it works is that if you don't have funds, and because you're just starting out, in your business account, what you would do is you would transfer the money, let's say $100 to buy something. You transfer that from your personal account to your business account, and that's considered a loan. And then that also shows up in your accounting process. And then when you pay that back, if you pay that back, then that also, oh my gosh, that's cool. Then it also will help your tax benefit situation. You want to put anything, any mileage, any of that kind of stuff you want to bill through there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you don't need to be an LLC. You can work, again, check with a CPA. You don't need to be an LLC. There is some protection there. The other thing you want to look at down the road, not necessarily right away, in my opinion, if you're going to be doing commercial work or work in facilities like you're talking about, then you probably want to look at some kind of insurance. There's two kinds of insurance that you probably want to look at. One is liability insurance, and the other one is, of course, theft. If you're doing any kind of work professionally or charging for, your homeowner's policy will not cover the equipment if it's stolen. So you want to have a look at a policy. There's a couple of companies you can get to that I can recommend that will do this for you. You can do it online. I know Allstate actually, insurance has just come up with about a year ago their own separate group that does photography insurance. But the liability means if a light stand falls over and breaks something, you're covered. There's also some other coverage in there, and also it has a rider for if the equipment is stolen. Excuse me. So that's the other thing you want to do. So, okay. The other one is how much. So Sarah asked, how much you typically charge for a photo shoot? I had someone ask me to take a baby announcement photos for them, but I'm not really. I'm only a hobby photographer. I'm not sure what to do for pricing. So it's not possible for me to give you pricing information, but I wanted to take this question because I think it's important to point out that what you charge and how you charge has nothing to do, it has something to do with your experience, but it's still your time. So the first thing you need to look at is how much is your time worth. So some people will start off and they'll say, well, I'm just going to charge them $30. Okay, well, that may be fine, but if it's an hour shoot or longer, plus the time it takes you to import the images, post-process them, even if it's minor, export them, send them to them, deliver them somehow, digitally, whatever, then if you don't charge the right amount of pricing, then you're going to be making less than a burger flipper. I mean, you won't be making $15 an hour. You're making more like $3 an hour. So even though you're a hobbyist, now I'm not saying, let me back up. Let me say I'm not saying there's a way to do things like this and donate some of your time. All of us have done that. But if you are going to charge somebody, make sure that you clearly state what you're going to offer, what the criteria is, how many images they're going to get. Don't offer them 1,000 images. Offer them 5 or 10 to start with, and then look at it from that way. So even though you're a hobbyist, you have to look at your time. So if you were doing this as a hobby, or someone said, "Hey, we come mow my yard," and you have a hobby in your hobby, wouldn't you want to charge something to pay back for your mower and your gas and all that kind of stuff? So it's the same thing here. So there's expenses involved, so don't undercharge is what I'm trying to say. All right. So let's see here. So we got a question here, a comment. So Donald says, thank you for the insurance suggestion. Was able to put it under my homeowner's policy. Got your suggestion 2 or 3 sessions ago. $60 a year, $6,500 of insurance. I assume that's for your equipment. You can do a rider for theft on your insurance policy. I have seen that done, but I definitely would check, because I have seen, again, if you're a hobbyist, that's fine. But if they find out you are doing this and for a business, my insurance company, Allstate, said, nope, that's it. They won't cover it. So even computers and things like that. So you have to be very, very careful about that. And otherwise, you may find that you're not going to be covered. And he says, yes, for equipment theft. So that's just make sure. For a hobbyist, you definitely can put it under your renter's or homeowner's policy. And also, some of these policies you want to check into, especially the commercial ones, will cover not only liability, but also if you rent equipment. So if you rent something and let's say they'll charge you a deposit for the rental, some of this insurance will cover the rental fees of that deposit. So you can just show proof of that, and you don't have to pay that deposit part. So that's very helpful. So, okay. So let's see. So we got that one out of the way. This one says, I'm buying a set of reflectors. The size matter. I'm interested in 24-inch. So what they're talking about, and I meant to bring out a picture of one, talking about the pop-up reflectors that you can, use to bounce some light into somebody's face. And my evening buffalo, huh? That's interesting. Almost as weird as Lee Love, huh? My suggestion is no. 24 inches is not enough. The size that I carry, I have like 3 or 4 of these things that I keep with me in my car all the time, are 42 inch. So the opposite of that, instead of 24, 48 or 42, or somewhere close to that. And here's why. They're not that big, okay? They're not. It's not that they're not manageable. The other thing is they will, if you have more than one person, if you're photographing doing a portrait session for a couple, which is very common, 24 is a little small. The other thing is what you're looking for is a 5-in-1, which will have typically something like silver, gold, translucent, white, and black. Okay, which you may ask why I have black, and we'll cover that in another show, I guess. So you may want to be able to use a translucent one to hold over their head, and that gives you instant shade. And that's a great way to take care of the shadows over someone's face without using external lighting. So if you're shooting in midday, 12 o'clock at noon or whatever, and you got drastic shadows and there's no shade for you to shoot under, this is a great way. There's stands you can get for them to hold them, or you can get what we call in the business a voice operated light stand, which is a person, an assistant, a friend, whatever. And you can have them hold that up, and that, so a 42 inch is my recommended size if you're doing the basic stuff. You can get bigger ones, but I think 42 is about right. Now, if you're doing, now you mentioned you're doing portraits, and which is why I said if you're doing, I've had some people buy 12 or 24 inch for doing macro photography and flowers and things like that. But for portraits, I would definitely recommend a 42 inch. Oh, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I thought. So, Donald says also it was asked if not do anything but hobby. So on the insurance, and that's fine. The writer will cover that. That's not an issue. So it's when you're doing it for money is where they will not cover you. So you don't want to be in that situation. Okay. ABO, I think is the way that's probably that's not pronounced correctly. Considering a Canon Rebel T6, T7 DSLR, can you share some photos? Okay, so the reason I've kind of gotten away from taking these questions because they don't make sense, and they're asked 1,000 times over and over. But this one I wanted to take for a specific reason, and that is to point out that you cannot buy a camera by looking at other people's photos. You can't even buy a lens. I see people over and over again that will post a question like this. So the first thing is, if you want to see a sample of the photos from the camera or lens, go to the manufacturer's site. They post them all the time. Okay, but the second thing is, it doesn't matter because the situation is so different. Every situation, the camera settings, the camera that was used, the lighting, the time of day, what part of the world this was shot at, the skill of the photographer. In fact, I could post an iPhone photo, again, to somebody that asked this question, and they would never know the difference. Oh, that's great. I'm going to buy that camera. So never ask the question, if you don't mind. You can ask, but I wouldn't recommend asking a question for people to post photos of a camera or a lens of their photos, because they will not tell you a thing about a camera. What you want to do is you want to get your hands on the camera. You can't buy a camera on specs. You can't buy a camera by what other people recommend, even myself. You can look at that information, and as part of the equation. But what you want to do is you want to hold that camera in your hand, use the menus, look at it, try and shoot with a little bit if possible, and look at the sample photos. But mainly what you're looking for is how it feels in your hand. How does it operate? Do the menus make sense to you? That kind of thing. That will tell you more about a camera than looking at photos that somebody else that you don't know anything about posted. And honestly, it's just a waste of time, and it shows that you really, frankly, don't know anything about photography. So I would not recommend that. Okay, so hey Dean, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you on. Dean has a question. He says, when using flash for outdoor sunset, boy, I can't talk tonight. Outdoor sunset shots, I normally expose for the sky and then fill flash for the subject. Is there other methods? No, that's pretty much what I would do as well. Because in this sunset image, the sky is kind of a key element in the photo, and it's part of the, you want to make sure it's appropriate. So one way to do it, and again, you guys are going to probably poke fun at me because I'm going to tell you how to shoot on manual, but one way to do this is you don't have to go on manual. I go on aperture priority, for example, or maybe shutter priority. Doesn't matter. And I'll take a photo of the image. In fact, you can go on auto a lot of times. Take a photo. Look at what the camera says the exposure is. Okay, so all you're doing is using the camera as a light meter. If you think you know what aperture you want to shoot at, then maybe like f8 or something, then go to aperture priority and shoot f8. Take a shot. Then look at what the settings, what the EXIF data of the camera said was the properly exposed image. Let's say it's, again, f8 at 2/50th of a second or whatever at ISO 100. So then you can go to that if you want. Go to manual. I know I'm telling you this. Okay, you guys are, wait a minute, you just told me not to go to manual. I said it depends on what you're shooting. So go to manual, put in those exact same settings, whatever the camera told you to shoot on auto. But then change the settings. So what you want to do is you want to underexpose the background. And what I like to do is underexpose the background. But so if it's set f8 at 2/50th of a second and your flash will sync at that at ISO 100, then what you could do is go to f11 or shoot at 320th of a second. Then that will make the background just a little bit dark, okay? And especially if you're shooting into the sun, then it could be a problem. But so you want to make that, I like to make that background just a little underexposed. Then I turn on my flash and I bring that up and I start, depending on the power of the flash, I'll start at 8th power, 16th power, and do a test shot and see what that looks like. The reason I do that is that gives me room to go up in exposure or down in exposure. So if I need more power, I can go up to 8th power, 4th power, quarter power, half power, full power. If I need to go down, I can do that. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to balance out the exposure setting of the flash on the subject with the background. Now, I wish I should probably show you guys some pictures sometime instead of what a better example. But what this does is it gives you two things. Number one, if you're shooting lifestyles work, then I don't want that. I want that the background or the ambient light in the scene to be a 50% ratio between the lighting that I'm at, the artificial lighting, the strobe lighting. Okay, I don't want it to look lit. I want it to look natural, and you can do that by doing a 50-50. Or maybe sometimes a 60-40 lighting ratio, 60% or 50% ambient light, 50% strobe. And then that will give you a nice even lighting. If you want something more dramatic, which is kind of a style I like to do, then what I will do is, again, I will underexpose the background and have the flash a little more obvious. And that gives you a much more dramatic background. Okay, so here's a good question. I love these. This is great. He's saying that when using the last method he mentioned, does the shutter speed control the ambient light? Yes, yes, yes. Excellent point, Dean. You get a gold star because most people don't realize that. I mean, again, I'm going to do a whole series on this, but for now, let me explain to you. When shooting flash, the shutter speed is the only thing that controls the ambient light. The shutter speed the aperture will adjust the overall exposure, but it will not really, and it will adjust the strobe, I'm sorry, it will adjust the ambient light. I back up, I'm getting this all screwed up here. It will adjust the strobe, but not the ambient light. So, for example, here's where let's say you're indoors, a little more easier to control. If you want to, I've done many portrait sessions or magazine art shoots where I'm having to use the light. I want to show the background. I want to show the environment. So what I'll do is I'll set the camera up, typically if it's going to be slow, on a tripod, and I will do what I'm telling you. I'll do the aperture priority. Now, in that particular case, I may shoot on shutter priority, and I'll keep dialing the shutter down until I get the amount of background that I want, the ambient light. Then I'll put the strobe on, and then I'll go dial that into manual. Then I'll put the strobe on and adjust the power of the strobe. By adjusting the shutter speed, it does not affect the flash. I could be shooting at 2/50th of a second or 20th of a second. The flash power will be exactly the same. And that's a concept that a lot of people have trouble understanding, myself included when I started. But the beauty is you now can control the ambient light. So if I want more ambiance and ambient light, I'll use a slower shutter speed. I want to bring that up. If I want less, want to darken the background, I'll use a higher shutter speed. So I've been in conference rooms for executives that can't turn off the overhead lights. And they're like, I'm sorry, we can't turn these overhead lights off. We put you in here. I say, no problem. I can shoot at 250, 500th of a second. That room is completely dark. It's black. And the only thing you're going to see are the strobes. because the strobes are not going to change power setting by changing the shutter speed. Only the aperture will. So hopefully that makes sense. Great point. We got into more stuff than I wanted to, but this is good stuff. How low do I need to go while shooting ISO and sunsets? Again, whatever you need to shoot. I mean, I think people worry about ISO performance, especially on modern cameras. Modern cameras are fantastic. I've shot pictures at ISO 10,000, 12,800. There are no noise in those pictures, depending on the subject matter. You know, that's the key there. And so it doesn't really matter. Just shoot whatever you need to. Again, set your aperture and your shutter speed if you want, or aperture priority. And if you're not getting, if it's too dark, up the ISO. There's a lot of misconceptions about ISO performance. And a lot of it I've had as well in the past. It's an old school thing. When we were shooting film, boy, I didn't want to go over 100 or 400 at the most. Tri-X film was just 400 was noisy and grainy. So you purposely only use the lowest shutter speed possible. But nowadays that's not quite as much as important. You can easily shoot at a 1200, 1250 or higher and never have a problem. In fact, I'll make a prediction to you. You guys can like this or not. I predict that ISO will eventually go away. The cameras are getting so good, and the technology is improving so much that at some point it won't really matter. You can shoot it. The ISO just irrelevant. In fact, there are a lot of cameras nowadays that have dual ISO performance. So you can start at 100 and then they change over at 2500, and you go to 2500, and the 2500 is just as clean as the 100, and it starts over from there essentially. So ISO is not as big a deal as it used to be. Okay, let's see here. We're running out of time. Don't want to take too much. I wanted to shoot with an 8-month-old and have a rocking chair and a vintage wooden crate for props. Any suggestions? My only suggestion is to try and go back to what I was saying before. Try and tell a story. I applaud that you're using props, first of all. That's fantastic because you're already thinking about telling a story. You're including something. Also, remember perspective. So one of the things I preach in teaching photography is background, background, background. Meaning the background is a key element in your photo. You either want to eliminate it if it distracts from the subject or the story, or you want to include it. So by putting something in the background, one of these props or other props, you can help tell the story subconsciously without it being so obvious. And you can also put something in the foreground. In other words, you say you have a wooden crate or a rocking chair. I'm sure you're going to have the 8th-month-old, I guess, in the rocking chair. But if not, why not put the rocking chair in the foreground and have it out of focus as you shoot through it? Or have the wooden crate or something sitting on the wooden crate, a toy or something like that, that helps tell the story. Okay, so use these objects. Remember, you're photographing a 3-dimensional world, but you're trying to represent it with a 2-dimensional medium. So you're trying to create depth. That's the whole reason people want these shallow depth of fields, because they're trying to create depth in their image. Okay, so those are quick suggestions for you. Hope that helps. My daughter's been doing photography for about 6 months, has some nice nature photos. She's wanting to make a business out of this hobby. Any suggestions on where to sell her images or prints? Well, first of all, Heather, I applaud you for encouraging your daughter. Whether it turns into a business or not, it's a great thing for her to learn to do. She can do photography her entire life, roll around in a wheelchair at 90 years old and still be a photographer. And of course, with all these automatic cameras, you don't even need to be able to shoot. You just aim and go. But anyway, that was what I want to tell you though is that she may be good. I don't know. You have to see some of her work. But nature or landscape photography is one of the hardest genres of photography to sell. Because they're just, in fact, when you talk to anybody that gets a new camera, I'll ask them, what kind of stuff do you like to shoot? And here's it's kind of a trick question because I'm probing. And the most common question, the most common answer I get is, oh, I like to shoot everything. Well, that tells me they haven't been shooting very long because they don't know yet what they like. You will eventually get to a point where you say, I love shooting this kind of work. Not exclusively, but they. Photographing nature or landscape is really, really hard because there's just so much. The other thing you'll find is that people that buy nature or landscape photography, for the most part, not always, it's either someplace they've been and it brings back a memory or represents something to them personally, or, and this is not very great for us photographers to hear, but it's true, they buy this because the colors match their sofa. It's they're typically buying something that, you know, it's not necessarily the photo as much as the colors. I mean, they obviously like the subject, but it's really the colors that that they're buying the image for. So that's something to keep in mind when she's, you know, looking a little bit into color theory. As far as selling the work, it's really hard. I would say try and do something online to start with. You could do some local places if the photos are representative of the local facility or location. People know that, and they'll say, oh, that's Red Rock, or that's this, or that's that. But for the most part, try and do something online. There are a lot of sites that allow you to do this, and will do prints and stuff like that. But also, if her work is as good as you think it is, don't underestimate the value, and don't undercharge. Don't give the work away, because if it's really that good, then there's a value to it there. Okay, let's see. Just starting out, enjoying lifestyle portraits. The two cameras I'm considering are Canon SL3 and a T7. Can you give me advice? I don't take these questions anymore because they're just so common. But the reason I did this one is because it pointed out what I said something earlier. You can't buy a camera on the internet, or you can't buy a camera by looking at specs. The SL3 versus the T7 are totally different cameras. You have to go in and look at them. You have to shoot with them. You have to hold them in your hands and see which one is most comfortable. If I had to give advice, it would say go with the T7, because the SL3 uses a slightly different mount, I think. Wait a minute now. Now I think about it, I think the SL3 does use an EFS mount. Got to check that out. But the SL3 is probably one of the smallest Canon DSLRs. But the T7 will give you a little more to grow into, so that would be my recommendation. Again, Sarah says, what's the best way to add watermark to my images? Sarah, don't put watermarks on your images. I don't believe in that. If you're trying to do it because it's going to protect your work, it's not. And it just it's most of the time it distracts from the image. A lot of times it makes it look like an amateur. So if you're trying to market your work and you're trying to brand it, there are other ways to do it than an ugly watermark. Because most of the time, it can work against you. People see a beautiful image, and then there's this ugly watermark in there, and all our eye does is go to the watermark, not to the image. So be careful about that. Okay, last question. When a client posts your work on Facebook, and there are hundreds of likes and comments, and the client doesn't even mention your name, do you get annoyed? No. And the reason is, the key there is client. It's not the client's job to promote your work. It's your job to do that. If they paid you and, and the check didn't bounce and they got the photos that they requested, then both of you have met your part of the equation, part of the agreement. So it's not their job to market your work. It's your job to do that. So take 15% of the payment and buy Facebook ads if that's what you want to do. But it's not their job, so you can't get annoyed at that. I mean, would an advertising client, put my name on their ad because I shot the photo? No. They don't. That's not the relationship that we have. It's a business relationship. It's not personal. I didn't do it for free. That wasn't the agreement. And so therefore, no, just move on, and you'll get used to it, I think. If not, then I think you're doing photography for the wrong reason, because your photography. Here's what I would tell you: if you're looking for the kind of gratitude or comments, it's in personal work. Every photographer should be doing personal work. You have client work and you have personal work. I'm always working on at least 3 projects for myself, things that I want to do, things that I'm producing. that I'm using my expertise and creativity on, not client work. That's the stuff that I would post that would be different that you might want to if you're looking for accolades, but I'm not. So anyway, that's my point. Okay, let's see. Dean asked one last question here. Let's see if we can get this up before we call it a night. It says, that's when I thought we would use rear curtain sync. I normally use half a second for club shoots to drag the shutter just enough to get the light. Yeah, that's not why you would do it for the sunset question you asked earlier. The way that what he's asking is rear curtain sync means when you put the shutter down, the shutter will open like a half a second and expose the scene with the ambient light, and then the flash will go off. I know we've all seen, mainly a very common one is a wedding picture or at a not rehearsal. What am I trying to say? Reception. Thank you. A reception. And where you see people dancing and they're all blurry, but yet then they're frozen as well. That's a rear curtain sync. So what happens is the curtain opens or the shutter opens, it exposes the ambient light that's in the room, then the flash goes off, which actually freezes the motion. So you could use it probably for sunsets, but I've never really done it for that. I just do, I use like the technique that I described to you. So anyway. Again, you guys, I appreciate you being here. Just remind you that first Friday of the month is when we do photo reviews. And so if you want to submit your work, we're happy to take a look at it. We'd love to give you some feedback and to help improve your photography. And if you also, if you're on social media, as I said before, be sure and follow us or join us. I'll follow you back on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And we also post stuff during the week that will keep you up to date on what's going on in the industry and other items. And if you're interested in joining our Facebook group, go to photomentor.tv/join. Love to have you over there. And if not, no big deal. Still love to have you as well. And again, thanks very much. I'm glad you guys are here. I hope this is helpful to you. Please, like I said, like, share, do all the same stuff everybody else does. And, to help other people. I mean, this is not about me. This is about them. I know how to do this stuff. I want you to know how to do it. And you do that by sharing this with other people and helping them to become better photographers or just to get more enjoyment out of it. So, anyway, I guess that's about it. So thanks again. And look, hey, we'll see you next week.